Cue this. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Jesse Vadala. I am seated comfortably with my good friends here in Connecticut, John Vander, representing TU as a project manager, as well as Brian Eltz, Fisheries Manager for Connecticut Department of Energy and Environment Protection. Excited to again tee up another one of these fun conversations around what's happening for wild trout in Connecticut. If you've been following along, we just completed a great informative training video, John and myself, teaching folks how to get involved with TU's tools for wild trout conservation, including spawning surveys. So this team that you're seeing here was a part of the initiative there in Connecticut, and we're excited and thankful for all the folks who have already volunteered. I'll use this chance to again give just a few minutes to both John and Brian to introduce themselves. And before I pass it off, I'll mention my name is Jesse Vadala. I represent TU's Northeast Conservation Team. I'm an engagement manager in New York and Connecticut. And what that means is that I actively work on conservation projects for aquatic connectivity and habitat improvement, large projects related to the brook trout all over New York and Connecticut. And I get to work with TU volunteer chapters and councils across New York and Connecticut as well. And so that's how I help put together programs like this one. So I want to pass it off to my buddy John, who can introduce you to his connection at TU.
Hi everyone, I'm John. I'm the Connecticut project manager with Trout Unlimited. I oversee dam removals, culvert right sizing, tree plantings, and everything in between from community engagement and education, trying to get everyone on board with all of our projects and cold water conservation. Brian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Brian Eltz. I'm a biologist, cold water biologist with the Fisheries Division of the Connecticut DEP. I've been with the state for 20 plus years now. Large focus now working with the state is stream monitoring project, stream angler survey, Farmington River management, and one of my nearest and dearest programs is the Wild Trout program in the state of Connecticut, largely working with wild brook trout and brown trout. Thank you.
Amazing. Looking forward to learning more about wild trout management. And we even teed up a few questions that John's going to help lead. And Brian has some slides to accompany those as well. So we're going to kind of skate through some important updates on what's happening in Connecticut. So if you are an angler or an enthusiast of cold water conservation and wild trout, this is a conversation for you. So let's kick it off.
Yeah, so I'd love to start the conversation about red surveys. So, Brian, can you tell me a little bit about red surveys, what they entail, and how you prioritize these red surveys?
Yeah, so we've been doing red surveys for in the state really in earnest in collaboration with the Trout Unlimited since 2023. Um, and we have done them in the past, largely focused on the Farmington River, looking at brown trout populations and spawning activity there. Uh, but we wanted to shift gears and largely focus on wild brook trouts and some sympatric populations of wild brooks and browns in the state of Connecticut. So the focus areas and how we selected areas was really to focus on state-owned or town-owned properties where some of our WTMAs go through, some of our other uh, predominantly wild trout streams so that we didn't have any issues with gaining access to private property. So we focused on some of our WTMA class ones, even some of our class twos and threes, some other important wild trout streams where public has access to get into those places. And that's kind of been our focus. We identified water bodies where we are stream monitoring, electrofishing. So we wanted to be able to pair some of our electrofishing data with what we're determining and seeing during red surveys and kind of moving on from there.
Beautiful. And for someone who have never done a red survey, do you have any tips of the trade, what to be looking for, and kind of ideas of how a new person who's never done a red survey can get involved?
Yeah, sure. So what we're doing when we're going out, we're typically looking during the traditional period of when wild trout are spawning. So that's September through December. So for brook trout, historically, what the literature suggests and what we've seen in some of our data, that is kind of September through November, although we are seeing brook trout spawn well into December. I don't know whether that's a climate change thing or that was an abnormal year and warm year in which we were seeing brook trout that late. And for brown trout, typically kind of October into December and even January in some years. And I've even seen them spawning into late February in some of our lakes. So collaboratively, we've been working with Trout Unlimited, and Trout Unlimited has produced some really good material on how to identify and how to utilize the Survey 123 app that they put together to log data, start locations, end locations, where reds are located, take photo, or where you identify reds, capture them with the georeference tool, and take photos of those. So, in my experience, brook trout reds are very difficult to identify in certain streams, depending on the sort of substrate. They're small. You can have 4 to 5 inch little brook trout spawning and creating sometimes not even a deep open pit with a tailing like you would think a red should look like with a brown trout. A lot of times they are in the tails of pools, undercut banks, in between rocks, under logs, just behind logs, and can be difficult to identify. But some of them are what you would consider a true red with a deep pit, a few inches with the tailings behind. I'm often impressed at what they can spawn, and sometimes it's larger material, substrate greater than an inch, and it can vary in size and even go down to the size of small pebbles or even sand grains are what we're seeing them, and it can be all over the place. So what I typically try to do when I'm identifying is looking kind of swifter waters, behind logs, undercut banks, in that appropriate material. And what I like to do is start early in the red surveys, and what I mean by that is start in September, kind of before the activity is really going to start to occur. Then after that, you can kind of see the reds develop activity. You can monitor the activity of fish. You start seeing fish move out of pools into some of these areas, these riffle habitats, and their behavior changes. So that's kind of a cue. There's nothing better than walking through a stream and seeing 2 or 3 brook trout on a red and saying that's a brook trout red there. So it's not an easy thing to do. You gain experience doing it. And again, we like to go out every 7 to 10 days on some of our main streams that we're trying to monitor regularly. We kind of we'll start going out again in September through December, and you can kind of see that habitat change and where they're kind of going into and doing their thing and spawning. For brook trout or for brown trout, it's a lot easier. You can have a 12-inch, 13-inch fish. It's a bigger, deeper pit, tailings behind. The thing about too is when we're doing these red surveys and going out every 7 to 10 days, a lot of these reds will disappear within a week to 2 weeks, whether they become covered with algae, whether you have a high flow event, it can wash out some of the pebbles, so they become difficult to identify. So again, going out every 7 to 10 days is the perfect way to do it. The way you can get involved is you can reach out to me, Brian Eltz. Um, we can reach out to Jesse, and we can reach out to John, and we can identify areas where you might be interested in going to. It doesn't have to be a WTMA, or some stream that we've monitored before. We like to know in advance that there likely are brook trout or brown trout or both in those systems, and we can go from there.
Love that. Brian, I appreciate you teeing that
Yeah.
up as well, because we do have, and I'll share the links for both. We have a sign up form for folks who want to get involved in the state of Connecticut. We did already get some great responses for folks who picked, as you mentioned, some of the WTMAs, and then also just some favorite small streams nearby that they mentioned they
Right.
wanted to get out and check out. So we're encouraging that type of input from folks. And we did record the previous training that John and I will link as well, at the bottom of this one. So it's really great. I appreciate how much care you've given to this program, Brian, and letting us get involved at the TU level. A really cool thing that I think you shared and added to this year's sampling request was water temperature as something that we could also do, which I thought was cool. The anglers, like myself, often thinking about their thermometer in the summertime and how important that data is for being safe around wild trout. But actually keeping that thermometer on you when you go out to do your spawning surveys, using the notes section in the Survey 123 app, and including that data, as it really helps us close the loop on some of the cues we're looking for. As Brian mentioned, we're still just a few years into these surveys, and it's really helpful to gain new pieces or new layers of data. So that was one thing I really enjoyed that you encouraged about our volunteers, our encouraging of our volunteers for this year. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I appreciate it because that's one of the things we're trying to tease out is when spatially and temporally when this spawning is happening. I don't think we lie in that traditional September through October mode. And in fact, this past week we saw a great deal of activity on some of our streams. So end of October into early November, and temperatures were dropping just below 10 degrees Celsius, and right around that 8 degrees Celsius mark, and that's right in that 47 to 50 degree Fahrenheit. So I think that's kind of the tipping point. A lot of literature suggests that they go down to 5 degrees Celsius. So we'll see, but this is really important stuff for us to collect. I think, rain influences and flow events kind of influences some of what we're seeing out there as well. So we appreciate everybody's input.
That's awesome. It's great. Seems like we're in prime time.
Yes, exactly. In fact, I do have some videos to sh a quick video to share. If at some point in time we can get to that.
Cool. Sounds
Yeah,
great.
Yeah, love that.
yeah. So, earlier I was talking about identifying reds. What we're doing is we're looking for some clear patches where gravel has been cleared with the depression. This happened to be a stream that I was checking on in 2023. This is probably November-ish. And then the photo on the left was an area at the tail of a pool with a lot of really good gravel in that area. So typically you will see that the bigger adult fish are going to hang out in the pools, are going to drop back into these tails of the pools, into the riffle habitat, or move upstream. This happened to be what we're calling a community nest. So there were multiple reds in there, probably three, four, five. And there were probably brook trout and brown trout in there. There were smaller reds, larger reds as well. So there's obviously some spawning going on at the same time. The photo to the right was more of an undercut bank, so it had a little bit of cover. I kicked a brook trout off of this site when I was coming up through. That's one thing you see is you kind of see these brook trout, brown trout in these spawning areas, and you will kick them out, but they do go back. It's okay. You get out of the stream, and they tend to go right back there. So that happened to be a little more protected area. You can see that nice clear gravelly substrate, and there was a depression with a tailing on that one. So these photos aren't always great. It's a lot better with the naked eye. But if I had some underwater cameras, I could take some better photos. And then more recently, I was able last week, I was on a stream and I probably counted about 50 reds within a 2 hour stretch. It's
Wow,
the most activity I've seen since doing this. I was truly, truly impressed. It's
Wow.
a tributary of the
beautiful.
Connecticut River. And this happened to be some video, and I'll put that forward. But throughout the entire thing, it was kind of a sediment. Sandy substrate, silty substrate, and there were these clear pockets of at the heads of pools, tails of pools, kind of below some woody debris where there was a nice riffly habitat and obviously some gravel in those areas. So in this stream, you could go through and you could see what were called test reds, where I think brook trout are going in and kind of testing the substrate, moving around, finding the most specific kind of good substrate for them to spawn in. And this one happened to have, and I'll play the video now, 4 to 5 brook trout. It's a short video, and you can kind of see them kicking around in there. There's two main ones in the middle, and then you'll see
Mhm.
occasionally one brook trout kicks out another. So he went after it right there, and I'll play it again. So really impressive. So it shows that you have, a paired up group of fish, and then you have some other uh, males trying to get in there on some of the activity. So, but very impressive.
Great video.
Yeah, yeah, and I have some more too, but that was one of the better ones. So.
Great.
So that's some of the things you're kind of looking for, and those reds do as you're walking through and you see the silty, sandy substrate, that kind of pops. Um, so, and it's like I said, very helpful when you have fish doing that. Very clear.
Mhm.
Great.
Great. Brian, can you touch a little bit about how the brown trout and the brook trout are inter kind of using the same habitat and how water temperature affects that and their spawning?
Yeah, so again, we're early on in collecting data, but there definitely does seem to be some overlap here in the fall where we're starting to see in some of these populations where they're sympatric populations, so both brooks and browns, where they're spawning at the same location and sometimes at the same time. So clearly they're queuing in on some of those water temperatures. Again, this activity in this stream and some other streams last week that we were kind of in between 8 degrees Celsius, 10 degrees Celsius, so in that 47 to 50-degree Fahrenheit. And browns are kind of queuing on the same time as well. I think they start a little bit later, obviously, than brook trout, so they're going to be spawning as temperatures get down to 5 degrees Celsius and lower. So, yeah, kind of occupying similar habitats.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And uh, can you talk a little bit about how these sites for the spawning surveys are selected and historically what you're seeing for them as you're sampling?
Yeah, so most of the sites that I selected for us to do, and then other TU members have reached out with obviously their input, were streams that we had data on brook trout populations. So we wanted to go in and verify and document, okay, where's the habitat they're spawning at? So a lot of that was involved in the site selection. Obviously, with the TU chapters, they want to do something within their watershed. So that was more important. So as they reached out, I could identify a WTMA1 where again, public access for me was key because I didn't want a lot of people trespassing and going out there or having to knock on doors. I do that, and as a state, someone who works for the state, it's a little bit easier. I can show my card. This is what we're doing. I do it when we're sampling. So that really was key. Is having had fish population data from there, so electrofishing from what I've done, from what other biologists have done, and kind of getting a regional feel for what's going on out there. I have a map here of, kind of our spread starting in 2023. So I also wanted a spread because clearly you have something different likely going on in the Western Highlands, Eastern Highlands, the Connecticut Valley, Southeast, and Southwest portions of the state. So eventually I'd like to be able to capture data from all of those locations and look at the water temperatures, look at flows, look at rain events, that sort of thing, and kind of tune in what's going on. So this was just a graphic from 2023 when we started out, and I think we started in November of that year. So we started late, we kind of got together, we had a conversation, met on the Farmington River, and we did a bunch of stuff in the Farmington drainage. And you can see that kind of the upper left-hand corner of the state here. And then we spread out and did some other areas. But really, since then, and this is all the data collected from 2023 through 2025, is we've done 38 streams that have been logged in there. And these dots represent both start and end points for a red survey as well as locations where we have a documented reds or identified what we think is a red. So I know we've done some more that have not been logged in here. So my hope is that with site selection, getting back to that, is we can spread that out and get to other areas of the state and really get a big picture of what's going on in the state of Connecticut with spawning wild brook trout and brown trout.
I'm excited to see how many more dots we get on the map this year. We've got some.
Yeah, to me, it's always cool going in there. Oh, we got another dot in another area, and somebody's down there, and I click on it, and you can see a photo of, of a red and things like that. So it's, you know, very cool. And to me, this is one of the greatest times to be out on a stream. The leaves are falling. Um, the smells are really good out there. The trout are doing their thing, and there's not a lot of people out there in the streams too, so you kind of have them to yourself.
I agree.
Hmm.
Great time to get out.
Yes.
So, as you've been sifting through this data and had some time to kind of think about it, do you have any hypothesis as you're interested in moving forward that we can be thinking about as we're collecting some of this data?
Yeah, so one of the main goals for me is to really kind of key in on in the timing. Is it really happening, starting October 15th each year and ending by November 15th? I don't think that's the case. I think it's temperature dependent. So that's one of the things I wanted to look at, is determine, what's causing the onset of red development and spawning. So that's one of the things I wanted to look at, and see basically. as well as, are there other cues? And these are things that we'd like to test. So a lot of these sites we are collecting long-term water temperature. So we have hobos logged in there as well
Cool.
as taking, thermometer readings when we're there so we can compare. So we will be able to look at that onset and when it occurs, kind of the tails of start to end and kind of the peak and kind of get a better idea. Obviously, the substrate and mapping of the substrate is important because to me that's areas that we can go in and protect. Um, and then obviously flow. I would like to look at rain events, flow events, and see if that has any correlation with what's going on in our stream. So those are kind of the things I wanted to look at and test and see. So um, yeah, so obviously we can gain better knowledge, and if we ever decide, that there are certain streams, and this has always been a thought of mine for conservation need, that they're important tributaries, that they're seeding other areas, seeding, segments of larger river systems that, maybe we'll consider a closure through our reg package on certain streams at certain times of the year. So,
I think that is very encouraging to hear for anglers
yeah.
and enthusiasts of the rivers to learn that there's really forward thinking happening from your desk out with your team talking about, potential solutions both from the regulation side and then also from the anglers best practice encouragement side, which is kind of where I think our two roads meet together, right? And the purpose of this discussion is,
Yes.
where does work like this go when folks do get involved? What do they hope that their collection of data will help contribute to? And you just kind of help frame that out, I think, for folks who are just getting acclimated to what we're doing here, is that we are indeed collecting this data and supporting the at-large goals, which may be very unique. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the kind of more unique topics that come up related to the complexities of wild trout, both with populations of wild brown trout and brook trout to manage throughout the state. So I'm excited to tap in a little bit further with you.
So speaking of some of the complexities of brown trout and brook trout interactions, Brian, you mentioned a little bit about brown trout roundups or brown trout removals. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we have one site in the state of Connecticut where we're actively conducting brown trout removals from a sympatric population with brook trout. So prior to 2020, the data suggested that this stream, Kent Falls Brook, which is up on the screen right now, has a nice barrier in place there, a natural barrier. Upstream of that barrier historically was all brook trout with no brown trout. I went in and sampled that stream during 2020 during COVID. We were doing limited sampling. I was actually looking for an invasive um, brook trout gill lice. Did not find it. I was kind of doing it statewide. I could go in with small crews, and I found somewhat high densities of brown trout in there as well. So brook trout and brown trout were present. So we kind of talked about it for a few years, and we decided we kind of wanted to go and do some more sampling and then look at what a possible brown trout removal would do and how that would impact the brook trout population. It's been done in other states and it's been effective in other states. So we went in 2023, we sampled a couple locations above the falls, Duggan Road, Carter Road, and at that time we determined that brook trout densities just above the falls at the Duggan Road site. It's about 150-meter sample sites. You can see on my screen that brook trout densities were fairly low, 76 fish per kilometer compared to a wild brown trout, which were 208 fish per kilometer. So, and you can also see that the size range of the brook trout, and I'll get into this a little bit more, were smaller than upstream. So they ranged in size from 6 to 18 centimeters. So what we do is we did the sample, determined these numbers. We removed 32 brown trout from that site. We placed them back into the stream below the fall. So again, there's no way fish are going to get back over those falls. You can see that to the bottom right there. So there's a natural barrier in there. We sampled the site upstream, Carter Road, found that brook trout were doing better up there. So higher densities. This is about uh, probably half a kilometer upstream from the Duggan Road site. Did a 200-meter sample up there. Found the brook trout densities were better. Size range was better. So we saw some fish approaching 8, 9 inches there. and brown trout densities were lower. So interesting that not only were brook trout densities lower at the bottom end of this stream section, but also the size range was smaller. So obviously there's some sort of competition going on there with brown trout. So they're affecting the population size and as well as the size of the fish. So that site, again, fewer brown trout upstream at Carter Road. We removed 11 brown trout, placed those below the dam. So our intent, and this was probably done midsummer, our intent was to go back later that summer and do a more widespread brown trout removal and to kind of see how the population responded. Unfortunately, we had high flow events that summer. We couldn't get to it. So we went back in 2024 and we did a very intensive 2 day removal of brown trout from above the falls all the way up through Carter Road, up to Carter Road, another crossing where Kent Falls comes in, and then a bigger no-name trib that comes in. And then for about 2 kilometers, we removed all brown trout that we could get. Flows were high that fall. We were using 2 and 3 backpacks, and we did the best we could, but we removed 203 brown trout total. They ranged in size from 5 centimeters, so a few inches, up to 36 centimeters, so approaching about 14 inches or so. Some mostly smaller fish, though. We also looked at the densities of brook trout and brown trout at that Duggan Road and Carter Road site, and we did find that the densities improved after our initial removal from the prior year at both at the Duggan Road site, while brown trout densities did decrease. At the Carter Road site, densities for brook trout decreased a little bit, but they're within the natural variation of what we would see in a brook trout stream, and brown trout densities decreased. So we felt we had an effect with that little bit of a removal the previous year. So again, this was a high flow year. We did the best we could. So we went back in 2025, this year. We did this both years, 24 and 25, in late September. So we wanted to get fish right before they're getting ready to go into spawn. So I think it was actually late August. And we removed 121 brown trout, so almost halved what we did the previous year. Flows were considerably better. We went in with 2 and 3 backpacks and sites. We felt we were much more effective. The brown trout ranged in size from 6 to 37. That 37 centimeter was a big, beautiful brown trout that we moved up above where Kent Falls takes a turn toward Carter Road, and then a no-name trib comes in. Again, all these fish were removed, put below the falls, unharmed. We just wanted to put them back into the same system below the falls. What was really cool is we only got one young of the year brown trout in that entire lot. So that tells us we did a really good job at removing the spawning fish the previous year. And then the majority of the brown trout we removed were yearling size fish. So they would have been young of the year the previous year and grew to yearling size. So I'm pretty confident that we're doing a pretty good job at this, especially since we're almost having it each year. Now we looked at densities just at the Duggan Road site because our intent here was to kind of just go through, remove the browns, but I counted brook trout at that Duggan Road site. And brook trout densities decreased a little bit from 2024, but they were still up from 2023. And brown trout densities were down from 23 and 24. So I think we're having a positive effect. And again, we didn't measure or count any brook trout at the Carter Road site because our intent was just to go through and remove these brown trout and get them below the falls. But the overall impression of young of the year brook trout throughout the entire reach was really good. We saw lots and lots, and this is anecdotal, but we saw lots and lots of juvenile brook trout. So I think there was a really good spawn in 2024. So we're going to see how this plays out. And really, this is based on some work that was done in Minnesota. So in this graphic, you have 3 chunks, basically. You have age 0 fish, brook trout. And these are densities, number of fish per kilometer, adult fish, brook trout, and then really large brook trout, greater than 20 centimeters. So, and what they did in 2000, starting around 2010 or 2009, they started removing brown trout from one section of the stream, and that's represented, and you can see the response of the brook trout from this dark line that tends to go up after that dashed line where the removal of the brown trout occurred. And then they had a control area downstream where they did not remove any brown trout. And you can see number one, the natural fluctuation of the brook trout population, but really the response after a few years of doing the removals there. So that's what we're aiming at, and hopefully we see in Kent Falls Brook is that rebound of the brook trout population with the removal there of the brown trout. So again, worked well in this system. Pretty high densities there. You can see in some instances they were up around 1,200 fish per kilometer of young of the year. That's very high density. Um, you know, Rarely do we get into those reaches in the state of Connecticut. There's a few streams like that, but very high density. So we'll see. Hopefully we see that positive response.
That's awesome.
And again, it's
Really
not that
cool.
we dislike brown trout, but there's certain places where they should be and shouldn't be, and if we can remove them and create better opportunities for brook trout, we should try and do it. And we're very limited in areas we can do this around the state. Um, we have some intent for, some ideas for possible future areas. All of these water bodies listed here. Obviously, we're going to go back to Kent Falls. If we get to a point where we feel the population is responding positively, the brook trout population, by the removals of the brown trout, we might get down to like a maintenance type thing where we don't have to go through every year and remove hundreds of brown trout. It may be few here and there. We may be able to do it every few years, and that's the sort of intent. But we do have some other streams that members of TU have put forward that we've kind of thought about, that there are some sort of barriers in place, but many of these other systems would be very difficult to do what we're doing. There's a lot of factors that go in the sample ability to be able to do this sort of thing. It would be quite difficult. So we'll have further discussions about those down the road.
It's amazing that you all have taken
Very
this
cool.
on in this way, and also, I guess, kind of shedding a light on what could happen with the right variables in play. And it's also very neat to see, as you mentioned, it's a delicate dance done the right way. We're not putting down the brown trout. We're reapplying them to the same watershed where they were found and making use of a natural barrier to increase opportunities for the brook trout, which I think again speaks to the sensitivity of managing both for native fish like the brook trout as well as wild trout like the brown and brook trout we see as well. So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's really great, and great on your whole team for taking such a creative strategy. I look forward to seeing the data pile up in the years ahead. So it's gonna be cool.
Yeah. So are we.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Very cool.
John, any other questions on the transfer process? I guess when there's next on our list here, but um, I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, I think it's a thorough rundown on the parameters of what does work in this program and what doesn't, and we look forward to hearing more about it again in the future. So, cool. Uh,
Yeah.
what else have we got? Anything else on the topic base here?
Yeah. My only other questions for Brian cover about a little bit about the transfers going on and if genetics aren't taken into account into those transfers at all.
Yeah, so we've done transfers in the past and they've been very, very effective. So places that come to mind are Mill River Fairfield, where there was a chemical spill down there where brook trout died off, and this was in the 90s, so that we did a transfer there, and the brook trout are doing well in that system. But back then, we weren't really thinking about genetics. We could just take brook trout's a brook trout, take them from another source and put them there. Well, recent work in the state of Connecticut and other places suggest that's not always the best technique to use. Sometimes you have, um, populations within the same system that are completely isolated and maybe from small barriers and things like that. So, and they're unique to those systems and those areas and geographically of the state. So now when we think about transfers, we like to do that from the same watershed, sub watershed, or geographically similar area so that we're not taking fish from, say, western hills of Connecticut and putting them down near the coastal area. Because obviously those genetics play a role into the adaptation of those specific systems, those specific areas in the state. What comes to mind is in Tennessee, they have a northern strain and a southern strain of brook trout. This has come to light through genetic work. They've done some restoration efforts. They've taken fish from the northern strain, put them in the southern strain, where they've had some difficulties with population declines in brook trout, and have gone back and now are trying to eradicate some of those northern strain brook trout and reseed them with southern strain brook trout. So it plays a role. And the important thing about that is the southern strain in Tennessee is more thermally tolerant to warmer conditions than that northern strain. So again, these are the things we learn as we do studies. So, moving forward, we're currently working on a brook trout transplant in a very small tributary of Waterbury of all places. Um, I happened to find this stream. We had not sampled it before, and I sampled it first in 2021. And my intent is when I was looking at Beaver Pond Brook, which is parallels Route 84 here in Waterbury, which historically there were some brook trout there. So I did a resample in 2018 and 19, determined that there weren't brook trout present at that location. Did some more sampling upstream nearby tributaries, determined, okay, they weren't upstream. There were some wild browns present, which were present 30 plus years ago. And then I found the stream Turkey Hill Brook. Had a marginal population of brook trout in a small stretch of stream below a culvert. But upstream of that culvert, which was not passable, was very steep, very smooth bottom, so there's no way fish were able to pass upstream. So at some time during the course of building this road, it's likely they interrupted brook trout and they were eradicated from that stretch of the stream. So 2021, we went in there, found brooks below that crossing, went back, looked upstream. They weren't there, went back in 2022, same thing, 2023. So a lot of times we like to go back to these sites because we're not 100% effective when we're electrofishing. So it's possible that we must miss a brook trout, but we wanted to make sure before we considered moving fish further upstream. So in 2023, we made the determination to go in, take some fish from below the road crossing, where we feel we would not be detrimental to that population downstream, and move some adults upstream. Largely, this stream holds yearling size and adult size fish. We get very few young of the year, which is interesting. So in a typical transfer, we might consider transplanting 3 year classes, so young of the year, yearlings, adults. So that way you have instant population, number one, but number two, you had fish spawning that fall. And then right behind that, you have those young of the year and yearlings coming behind that. So you can kind of see that population grow. And that's what we've seen at other locations. So this time, we just moved some adults up there. We moved a total of 22 adults in the October 2023, 12 males, 10 females, put them upstream of the crossing, probably 100 to 200 meters upstream from there. Did some red surveys that fall, did not see any. Again, brook trout reds can be difficult to observe, but I did not see any that fall. Went back, sampled with electrofishing gear that next year, so in 2024, and we did document 6 juvenile brook trout. Not a lot, but there obviously was some level of spawning in there that occurred. We did not find any adults. What I think happened is I think we put some of those fish too close to the road crossing, and many of those fish may have dropped down to below the road crossing. So I also did red surveys below the road crossing just to kind of check on that population. I didn't see any that year as well. I only did a couple. So then kind of we're thinking about what to do next. So then at October 2024, we decided let's put another batch of fish in there. So we went below Interstate Lane, grabbed 7 adults, let go a bunch of other ones, three males, 4 females, put them further upstream, so below the next road crossing, thinking that they would stand a better chance of staying in the stream. And we did document spawning that fall. We found a couple reds, and we decided, okay, we're going to let this cook for a little bit. We didn't sample this year, but we did do some recent red surveys within the past couple weeks. I saw a couple reds and test reds, and then another biologist went in and did one this end of past week, and he did document some more reds, and he found one 10-inch or so brook trout on a red. So
Oh,
Obviously, one of the adults stayed up there from the last transfer, and there's active spawning going on. So, um,
Great.
we're hoping we're going to see. I may go in there next year and kind of see what the population is doing. And the intent here too was there was such a small section of stream that had brook trout downstream of Interstate Lane, and then it goes underground that we wanted to enhance that population in that stream so that if something did occur downstream of that, there is a population upstream. And then we'll look at moving fish upstream of the next road crossing down the road. Um, and these are the sorts of things that we may look to in the future and incorporating some spawning possibly in a hatchery environment. We're not sure on that. We may do some testing down the road where we can bring some adults back to the hatchery, spawn them, and then release their young back to the from the donor stream and then the transplant stream. So some things we're thinking about with this project down the road as we build it up. Um, we did as well do
Cool.
some transplants this fall as well. Uh, we did two additional sites where we first and foremost we collect data on these sites, water temperature data. We look at the habitat, obviously, is there good riffle pool formation, is there appropriate spawning substrate. We also look at the water temperature data and we determine what over summer water temperatures look like. So the two sites where we transferred fish to this fall, we had looked at the previous summer and this summer, and temperatures checked out okay. So we had a no-name tributary to the Connecticut River in Windsor. I've sampled it several times. Very, very cold water, groundwater that comes out from, under Route 91 along Route 20 and then drains down through there. But no brook trout were present. But we surmised that at some point in time before 91 was built, before Route 20 was built, before some of the development occurred in Windsor, that there were likely brook trout in this system. So we decided to transplant fish from a local donor population nearby, not within the same system, but nearby, so likely genetically similar. And we just did that. I've been doing some red surveys there the past couple weeks, and I think I documented one last week. So positive sign. And we're going to continue to monitor that stream to see what goes on there. Um, and then another stream that we did a transplant at was a no-name trib to Cobblebrook in Kent, where we found a really good donor population. We removed 100 fish from the donor population. And again, same with the no-name trib to Connecticut River. We did multiple year classes. So different from the Turkey Hill Brook, we removed young of the year, yearling sized fish, and adults that were ready to spawn. So again, we get that instant population, and then we hopefully get spawning this coming year. So difference with this no-name trib to Cobble Brook is it previously did have brook trout in its 30 plus years ago in an original stream sample that was conducted 1988 through 1995. I've gone back, sampled it a few times. No brook trout present, no brook trout present upstream, smaller tributaries, things like that. Temperatures checked out good with thermographs that we were placing in there, hobo loggers. So we finally did. We've been hemming and hawing, and this was the year we went in, found a good donor population, and transplanted fish to there. So um, I've done one red survey there because it's kind of a far drive for me to get out there, hour and a half, 2 hours, depending on traffic, but have not documented any red development there. So we're hoping we're going to see positive results there as well. So we have some
Wonderful.
other sites possibly lined up down the road that I'm looking at the same thing, looking at water temperatures, looking at nearby tributaries, close by watersheds, things like that, trying to find proper donor populations for transplant. So this is the sort of thing that came out of our big resample from 2018 and 19, where we resampled sites from 30 plus years ago, determined brook trout weren't present at those sites before, did some more intense sampling upstream, downstream, local tributaries, determined that brook trout might not be present anymore in some of these locations. So now we're going back and saying, what can we do? And we're doing things like this. So again, this is for, we're being conservation minded here as well as, we for fishing opportunities in some of these streams as well down the road, obviously. Um, so just so we're not so brook trout centric tonight. We also are looking at enhancing brown trout populations. So I threw in this slide. We have Salmon Brook and Glastonbury, which is a Class 2 WTMA. So it's a little bit different than a Class 1, where it's Class 1s are just catch and release, single artificial hook, no bait. Class 2s, you can harvest fish 12 inches or greater, 2 per day. We have a pretty strong population, brown trout population there, no brook trout present. It's below Addison Dam and down to Keeney Cove, a cove of the Connecticut River is where this WTM is. So we've been monitoring, every few years, brown trout population has crashed. It was completely sustainable population with no stocking. So we've been doing some experimental stockings in there in the fall with advanced fry and some fall fingerlings. Of late, past couple of years, we've been using our survivor strain of brown trout, and those are offspring of the Farmington River strain. Um, and we've had some positive responses from those. We're doing annual electrofishing. We saw more than a doubling of the population in there. We did document that there was some natural reproduction again. And we have just, within the past couple of weeks, determined that there was some red development there. So, again, we're not just focused on brook trout. We are doing some work with brown trout. And this is a very unique case in that there is a dam in place, actually two dams in place. There are brook trout upstream. So this is an opportunity where we're not going to impact the brook trout here. They stay below the dam. There's good fishing opportunities, and it's not going to have any effect on the populations upstream. So, um, dissimilar from what we're doing at Kent Falls Brook. So, in this section of river isn't ideal for brook trout. I should mention that as well. Conditions are not so suitable temperature wise, but okay for brown trout.
That's great. It's great to see the balance of treatment available, encouraging as, aligns with our mission at TU, and obviously our conservation work in the state has stayed with that mission as well. There are opportunities to improve habitat and to keep this hierarchy in mind. So thank you for, helping kind of highlight every possible avenue to go down. It's pretty exciting stuff. I feel like the big takeaway for me, even this far into our discussion, has been that there are multiple creative ways that are currently in play, that the state is taking, unique approaches to wild trout. And I think that's encouraging for the angling community to know that folks who are managing their fisheries are interested not only in the progression of ways that you can catch more and larger trout, but also preserving some really delicate populations of trout. Sometimes we're talking about efforts to move 5 or 7 fish as a ways to reclaim a stream that has no trout in it. So I think the delicacy of your work and the deep intricacies behind the science are really fascinating. So I'm pumped to hear all of this. And again, just from my seat, it helps bring home the message of why folks would want to get involved in the first place, why they would want to support the efforts of their state fishery, and again to get involved with a local TU chapter. Citizen science efforts help contribute to really great trout management, and I just think it's great that we've had this sense of synergy from the red surveys to helping support and identify streams like these where unique possibilities are there for us. So I think it's great. I'm excited about all of the above so far that we've discussed. So
Thank you. And one thing we haven't really touched on, and you talked about citizen science, and one thing I always preach and other wild trout biologists preach is to improve connectivity. That's one of the best and major things that we can do. So a lot of that would be, enhancing and improving road crossings. So again, we're not touching on that really tonight, but one thing I've been involved with and other TU is involved with, watershed groups are involved with, some of your chapters are involved with is improving connectivity. And that's really, really the best way that citizens can help is getting involved with some of the culvert surveys using the NAACC protocol that was developed in UMass several years ago. Because ideally, if we have a drought year and a section of stream goes dry, and we lose a brook trout population above a road crossing, that population can be recolonized by a nearby population lower section of the tributary on its own. And we don't have to do these sorts of transplants. Like with Turkey Hill, that's what we have to do there. That there's no way fish are getting upstream. But if we can identify some of those streams and get them replaced, essentially. That's one of the best things people can get involved with, in my opinion.
I agree. It's great. It's all in one app, right? We've talked about this. And if you
Yes.
hop over to the video that talks about our training, the Rivers app as a component of that survey 123 helps us identify them. And then also, too, I encourage this as well. If folks see these really extreme conditions, feel free to flag those and send us an email. Let John or myself know you're out. Wow, I've never seen this culvert so bad before. I've lived here all my life. Those are the kind of emails we like to hear about when folks see condition changes that they feel inclined to share. So, yeah, another great piece of it. I agree. The connectivity of it is front of mind all the time. So
Yeah. Great. Fantastic.
cool.
Speaking of condition changes, I have one question for you. You mentioned a little bit about your resampling. Can you talk about your resampling, what metrics you might be looking for while you're doing it, any hypothesis you might be testing, and then how those sites were historically chosen to start off with?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up because I briefly touched on it during the transplant conversation, is that a lot of great work was done prior to what we're doing now. So starting in 1988 through 1995, we had our historic, what we call our original stream monitoring program, where we had some great biologists out there, and they went out and sampled probably close to 1,000 streams. And the intent was to look at trout habitat, trout populations, look at where they can improve things through stocking, create WTMAs, TMAs, all these great management programs we have in the state of Connecticut now. So through time, we have been going back to some of those populations that were sampled from 1988 through 1995. And back then, they would do a three-pass depletion. So they would go through, set up blocking nets, they would do transects, they would look at habitat, they would measure habitat, they would look at macroinvertebrate populations. Now we just mostly look at fish populations. So we would go back to some of these sites, do a one pass, one time through, and we were kind of anecdotally looking at some of the data and saying, it looks like we're losing brook trout in some locations that we historically had them 25, 30 years ago. So looking at this in 2018 and 19, we decided to randomly choose sites from that original data set from 1988 through 1995 where brook trout were detected. That could be one individual, it could be 100 individuals, but we just randomly selected about 125 sites to resample. Resampled those same exact stream sections. So we went back, looked at the data, looked at start points, end points, looked at the length of the samples, and we were just essentially trying to determine if brook trout were still present. What we found in that original data set, and I think we resampled 106 or 107 sites, that 37% of those sites did not retain brook trout from what was previously sampled. That doesn't mean they weren't still present in the stream or river section. They just weren't present at that same location. So what we also found, if we wanted to look at, okay, if they were still present, what are the densities of brook trout doing? We did find that there was more than a halving of the densities of population. So it looked like we were losing a lot of our high density and very high density populations, and they were becoming more moderate to low. And again, we lost 37% of the brook trout at some of these sites. So we followed that up with more sampling. We went back to some of those sites and determined of those sites, only one or two sites had a brook trout present in a later sample. So obviously we're not 100% effective when we go through, but it kind of corroborated with what we saw, that we were losing brook trout at some of these stream sections. So we intensified our sampling, looked upstream, downstream a lot of these locations, close proximity tributaries, just to determine if brook trout were still present in these systems in nearby areas. And I don't have the data in front of me, but many of these locations had brook trout at least in nearby tributaries. So what we could have been seeing 30 plus years ago were fish dropping out of these tributaries using a main stem stream. One system comes to mind, the black ledge system that gets fairly warm in the summertime. We could have sampled it in June. By the time we got there, when we resampled, they were removed. But what we did find that there were pretty strong populations in some of these tributaries. And the way I look at it is in some of these systems, the main stem stream, some of these are second order, small first order streams with small tributaries coming in, are kind of like highways. They're using them maybe 9, 10 months out of the year. It becomes a little bit too warm. They go up in these tributaries. So we did find that in some locations, but many locations too, we did find that there were brook trout no longer present. So that's where we started getting into some of these transfers. And what can we do looking at water temperatures? Some of them we have found, I think it was close to 5 sites, and I haven't done it for all, that water temperatures were just too warm to support brook trout now. So, and very warm. So that's a bit alarming. So I don't have the temperature data from 30 plus years ago, but obviously they supported brook trout. And brook trout are pretty specific to their habitat. Once you start getting above 18.4 degrees Celsius, we can see densities decrease. That doesn't mean a stream that's, on the edge at 20 degrees Celsius, 21 degrees Celsius. They can find cold water pockets, thermal refuges. That's where we speak of the connectivity. If they were in a road crossing, they can go up and find cold water habitats, that sort of thing. So that's at play here. So we decided to do another resample in 2022 to see how that meshed up with what we found in 2018 and 19. Randomly selected close to 125 sites. This time, the criteria for choosing a site, though, was it had to have three or more individuals present in the original sample of wild brook trout. So it kind of reduced our what we could choose randomly as a site. We sampled close to 106 sites again. We sampled at least 10% of the sites we sampled in 2018-19 to see if we got similar results. And overall, we found a little bit less of a decrease in loss of occurrence. I think it was close to 29% of the streams had lost brook trout at that sample site. Again, doesn't mean throughout the entire system, but we did find more than a halving of densities. So I think this is a real thing that we are seeing and going back to these original historic sites that we are experiencing in some areas losses of brook trout. So that to me makes the work that we're doing now even more important. And it could be just a bad cycle, bad period. I hear about the 80s and how, it was the cooler period. The Housatonic River supported holdover trout. That's not always the case now because it is a thermally challenged river system and we rely on those tributaries and stuff. So, but yeah, so, the great thing is that state of Connecticut, we have a great data set. Where I can go back and look at a lot of these things and test these things and determine if, brook trout are still present. The other thing we're looking at too, and this happened at very few minimal sites, that it seems as though brook trout are either replacing or displacing brook trout. So by replacing, it could be that brook trout no longer are supported there because of water temperatures or some other habitat change. But the displacing is a concern. Obviously, that could be what's going on with Kent Falls and us trying to remove brown trout from there. So we don't know, but that was very few sites where we saw that occurring. So that is one aspect of what we were seeing with the decline in brook trout. But again, the great thing is we have this huge data set. When I compare what we have here compared to other states, and when I talk to biologists from other states, they're like, wow, you guys have a lot of data. So yeah, really, really cool to be able to do that.
A lot of data and creative solutions, it seems.
Hopefully.
Which is yeah, I think certainly
Yeah.
so. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like this frames a lot of that very clearly for folks who have been curious, myself included.
Mhm.
About and I've heard of some of these programs as they've been developing over the last few years. So this was fun to get to take a deep dive with you a little more on exactly what's happening. So very cool. And thank
Great.
you both for taking the time to have this discussion. I think I kind of precursored it earlier, but I think the big takeaway is if you're interested in getting involved, the local TU chapter is the place to get started. There are likely already folks involved at your chapter who are in our red survey system. If not, you'll meet a friend soon and you guys can get out and do some survey work together. If you'd like to learn more about this stuff, as mentioned, Brian, myself, and John are available by email. Happy to share info and encourage folks to get involved in citizen science for brook trout. So
Yeah.
I'm going to do my best to put a good cap on the end of this great discussion. And thank you guys again for being here and talking. Brian, again, thanks for all the great work from your team and
Thank you.
yourself. And again, thanks. This has been awesome. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I love to talk about wild trout, and I love to talk about the work we're doing. I love the support we're getting from Trout Unlimited. Without chapters like the Farmington Valley and Thames chapter that have really helped us quite a bit, and hopefully I'm not missing other chapters that are out there doing this sort of thing. They've really jumped on board with the red surveys and culvert surveys as well. So I truly appreciate the help, and this is not for loss. People we can do a lot. We can work together. We can get a lot of information, and I hope we can help reverse some of this trend that we're seeing.
Love that. We'll keep it on a positive up and up. Thank you,
Yep.
Brian, and thank you,
Mhm.
John, for a great conversation. And I look forward to seeing you guys on the stream soon.
All right. Thank you.